All right. So if I did all of this right, I should have started recording. Alrighty.
You did. We all got the
Oh, good.
announcement.
Thank you. See, this is the joy. Thank you, JP. All right. So welcome all to the winter Providence-Seekonk River Region Coastal Urban Watersheds Research Collab meeting. I'm super excited. Today, what we're going to do is just a bit of a welcome from me, just kind of just what this is. And we were supposed to have two presentations today, Michelle Gibert from Providence Resilience Partnership and JP Walsh from the University of Rhode Island. Unfortunately, Michelle has come down with the sicknesses that are going around. So she will not be able to present today. However, I'm going to catch up with her in the new year, and I have a few other folks who are really interested in presenting their work on this region, so we can definitely have her come on and do this again. So today's meeting will probably be a heck of a lot shorter than it initially was, but that also means we have more time to chat and share. So if anybody, as we're going through everything, wants to share towards the end, we'll have plenty of time to do that. So we will jump right in to our lunch and learn. I figure you're all here to hear JP over me. So I will pop on the end with some few updates that are relevant to this group from the estuary program and some teasing of, things we have going on. So I will pop off here of my sharing so that if I can find it, there we go. So that JP can share and start. And while he's getting set up, I'll introduce JP. So, as many of you on the call know, JP Walsh is a professor of oceanography and geological oceanography, in particular, currently at the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. He was the director of CUWRC at the University of Rhode Island, continues to do a lot of that work, so a lot of national and international work on sediments, on how things move, on microplastics, on all sorts of geophysical stuff that happens on the ocean. And JP and I have spent a lot of time chatting about urban oceanography. So I thought JP would be one of the perfect folks to come in and talk about this, because that's kind of what the Urban Collaborative was all about, this idea of we live on the oceans. We have our urban centers on saltwater, and that changes how we look at it. So JP is going to talk about microplastics today and a lot of work his lab has been doing and continues to do. So I'm going to let JP go. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Courtney. And hello, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. Let me just get this minimized. Hide things. There we go. Can you all see that okay? Great. So I'm going to talk about microplastics and a little bit on marine debris in Narragansett Bay and beyond. And I'm giving the presentation today, but I put Victoria as the first author because most of this is based on Victoria's hard work, her PhD work. And she's given a lot of presentations, so I raised my hand for this one. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Victoria is now kind of working at URI, but also working most primarily with 5 gyres. And it's great to continue to work with her. So, welcome everyone, and thank you. It's great to be here. I always like to begin by thanking everyone that's supporting research, certainly collaborators and colleagues, especially Victoria, who did a lot of the hard work. But, as we all know, research takes a village, and thanks for the funding. Actually, I'll go ahead and mention that, ironically, the funding that really supported this initial work was a very small grant from the URI Fraternity and Sorority Organization during COVID, and that's really what kicked this initial work off. So some of you don't know me, so I thought I'd give a little bit of a quick background. Again, I'm JP Walsh and professor in oceanography at GSO. In the upper right, you can see a little picture of me as a kid cleaning up after a hurricane in New Jersey. And I think I always fell in love with storms, and I didn't live at the coast, but always was fascinated by it. In the lower left, you can see my ball-headed self working in the mangroves of Papua New Guinea, where I did my PhD work, where a lot of my research focused on studying how materials move from land to sea. And that's really what kind of got me motivated towards looking at the plastic problem. I am doing a lot of other work beyond plastics, a lot on flooding and marshes and carbon, and coastal changes locally and globally. And as an example, in the lower right, you can see we just in the Philippines a couple weeks ago had a workshop on coastal mapping as part of a large fisheries focused project funded by the State Department. And I'm sort of director of what I call the Coast Lab, which focuses on coastal and marine geological changes and hazards and marine sedimentary processes, including microplastics and marine debris. And here's some pictures of various folks on the team. I've already, some of you might know Victoria, Mary Klimaszewski, who's sort of a marine research associate that's been doing a lot of work in our lab. Maya is an undergrad that supported this microplastic work, and Zachary and Mitchell are ongoing students in other areas. And, you know, this work has a lot of different collaborators. Reed Corbett is someone who's done lead-10 dating, and some of the other projects involve Aaron and many others. As I mentioned, we're working locally and globally, and I won't go over a lot of stuff that we're doing in our lab. So I'm here to talk a little bit about plastics, and I always like to start with this slide. It's for this old folks in the room. This is an image from a famous movie called The Graduate in 1967. And here's young Dustin Hoffman getting some advice from a father saying plastics is sort of a good field to go into. And this was sage advice. Shown here is a plot of time on the x-axis and millions of tons of plastic production. And you can see I've indicated that when the Graduate movie was released in 1967. And indeed, we have produced a lot of plastics. And you can see that we're continuing on this exponential trend of producing more and more with time. And on the sort of left, you can see a little headline from the New York Times in 1909 that a new chemical substance, bakelite, which is sort of one of the first types of plastic. The lower, the first compound, that's the name of it, oxybenzymethylcobalamin. I can't even pronounce it. And I think it sort of begs the question, how can we not be scared when we started making compounds that are this complicated? Anyway, some of us have seen many difficult images of charismatic megafauna this is a decaying bird with, of course, guts that are filled with pretty large debris. And then we've got a turtle here tangled in some fishing line. I think that while these pictures are important and move the needle for concern, I think we also need to be thinking about what are we not seeing? And that's where the microplastic story, I think, is important to think about. So if you're new to thinking about the plastic problem, again, we're producing hundreds of millions of tons. This says 270 million, but it's old. We're looking at, near 400 million or more tons per year. Of course, a lot of that is used along the coast. And unfortunately, some of it's mismanaged. And I put that in quotes because, some of it's maybe deliberately littered. Others are, trash cans blow over, or coastal communities maybe don't have ideal management. And we're looking at, 10 plus million tons per year ending up into the ocean. And the question is, where is it all ending up? There's estimates that's on the order of 10 to 100,000 are in the surface waters, but where's the rest? And I think that's one thing that we've learned over time is that we're seeing a lot along shorelines and in seafloor sediments. And I will reinforce that point here today. So shown here is a picture that I took a number of years ago. This was during COVID, of you looking towards the city. This is on the east side of or East Providence. And, you know, a lot of debris. I didn't stage this photo. This was real. And it's a mishmash of large and small, and it's all entangled with other rack from marsh grasses and more. It's sad, but it's real, and we do certainly have an issue, both macro and, as you'll see, microplastic. I want to give a shout out to Save the Bay, and other organizations that have done a lot of important work on cleanups and categorizing that trash that's collected. The number one category is drinking items, bottles, obviously, cups. In 23, 43,000 items were collected, and you know, I think it's just a testimony to the issue. So not always convinced that we need in-depth science to prove that there's a problem, but I'm going to give you some more science. So let's think a little bit more about microplastics. Obviously, macroplastics are very visible. What are microplastics? These are plastics that range in size from 1 nanometer to 5 millimeters in size. They're made up of a wide range of polymers, so polypropylene and a whole slew of acronyms here that I'm not going to go through. Of course, these microplastics can have additives. They can be used for lots of different reasons. We use them at a primary level for creating different products, but then used specifically for creating items in different sectors. Of course, they can have a wide range of sizes, different morphologies. You've all probably heard about fibers being a big issue in the marine environment, but of course we see all sorts of forms in the system. We see all kinds of colors, and of course, many of these have various toxins associated with them: PAHs, PCBs, DDT, heavy metals, you name it. In some way, it's probably associated with a microplastic somewhere. So how do we end up with these microplastics? Of course, in some cases, we do have primary microplastics where, again, maybe you have a spill that ends up in the environment. We don't see a ton of those here in Narragansett Bay, but what tends to happen is through physical and chemical processes, we break down macro debris into smaller things. Smaller particles. So we've got obviously UV light affecting the degradation, and then through mechanical processes, waves, currents, we can fragment, and through chemical degradation, we also can adsorb different things onto these plastics. And of course, because we have this range of plastic sizes, these can become associated with our ecosystem, different organisms, whether it's benthic organisms uptaking them by accident, or fish ingesting them, turtles getting entangled, birds consuming them. Sure enough, we see it in all parts of our marine ecosystem. In sort of in around the mid-teens, we had some important work that really looked at the floating plastic problem in the oceans. We heard about the garbage patches, which many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with. This is the idea that we have higher concentration areas in our sort of ocean basins related to the gyre circulations that we see in our oceans. So this is a figure from a paper that shows modeled concentrations of plastics, and we see higher concentrations in sort of the center of our, these various ocean basins related to the currents. One thing to note here is that we don't actually have a lot of data in the open ocean, certainly at this time, but even today, it takes a lot to have a cruise go out to these open ocean areas and to be collecting data. Not a lot of people were doing that. Anyway, based on measurements and model data at the time, it was estimated that we could only estimate about 1% of the plastic that's thought to be input into the ocean could be accounted for. And that means we're missing 99% of the plastic. And that's where, there's been a lot of work since sort of trying to understand where is that missing 99%. And I think the seafloor and the shorelines are where we're learning much of it is, as well as in smaller forms uh, in the marine system and in organisms. Anyway, so some of the work that we've undertaken is taken sediments from the marine environment, shorelines, intertidal areas, and subtidal areas, basically extracted through a density separation, the microplastics, get them onto a filter, and you can count them and analyze them with micro FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectrometry. Simply what this is scanning a filter and looking at the spectra that's produced from, you're using a specific laser, and based on the reflected light, you're comparing that to spectral libraries to match polymers. And with matches that are above sort of 80%, certain thresholds, we assume that it's a certain type of polymer, and then we can map what we see on a filter. Of course, it's a time-consuming process, and yeah, hats off for Victoria, who did a ton of work in this regard. So we had a paper that was published in 2023 that got some press because in this we talked about the concentration of plastics and microplastics in sediments going from Providence down to Narragansett Bay. You can see where we took samples on the shoreline in yellow and sediment grab samples in orange. And on the right is a graph of plastic concentration in particles per kilogram of dry sediment, moving from Bold Point, which is where that picture was taken, down to Narragansett Beach. And you'll notice that the blue bar are the shoreline sediments, and the orange bar are subaqueous sediments. And I think the first thing to note is that we have high concentrations, thousands of particles per kilogram up near Providence, in some places tens of thousands. And as we move down the system, we're moving down to on the order of hundreds of particles per kilogram. You also notice that you can see that when we look at the shoreline and the subaqueous, we see concentrations kind of, we'll say in the general ballpark, similar, both in the subaqueous than we do on the shorelines, right? Many people think of plastics as being lower density and therefore buoyant. But of course, first of all, plastics have a range of densities, and also they can be fragmented and fouled over time, which can lead to their density increasing, and as well as flocculation that can trap them and move them to the seabed. So yeah, we see this gradient, and from this distribution, we fit the data with a simple model. And by applying that model across the Narragansett Bay, we estimated that about 1,000 metric tons of plastic were stored in the upper 5 centimeters of the bay sediments, with about half of that stored in the upper estuary, because the concentrations are higher in the upper estuary. Even though it's a smaller area, it traps about 50%. And I like to show this picture as a reminder. This is what was taken out of one of the, I believe this was actually from a dredge sediment where we extracted sort of the larger microplastics. And so yeah, part of this work, we analyzed some dredge sediments from Water Place Park. And what we found were the concentrations were among the highest that we measured. And just looking at this picture, you can see that it's an incredible diversity of plastic types. And I highlight this not just in color, but in shape and obviously composition. This is concerning, right? Because management efforts, we often hear about plastic bag bans or bottle bans, which are important, don't get me wrong. But I think what I want to emphasize here is that we have a bigger plastic problem and that we're producing more and more types of plastics used in all sorts of sectors. So like a singular approach is not really sufficient to addressing this bigger issue. And also, I'm happy to announce that uh, one other of Victoria's chapters was just accepted in environmental science and pollution research. Yay. This paper highlights how we have exponentially increasing microplastics in our sedimentary records. And we'll talk about that next. So shown here is sort of what we basically did to reconstruct plastic pollution in Narragansett Bay. And in almost all of the sites, we find exponentially increasing plastic concentrations along our coast. Essentially, what we do is we take a core, we analyze down the core activities of lead-210 to help us date it. Additionally, we also measure cesium-137, and from those two, we can get accumulation rates. That provides the geochronology of the core. We also like to look at the grain size just to understand how, if and how the sedimentary environment system may have changed over that period. At this core, you can see it was fairly consistent sedimentologically. And then on the far right, you can see a plot of concentration of plastics going down the core with time, where we see at the uppermost sample, approximately 2,000 particles per kilogram of dry sediment. And as we go down in time, we see lower concentrations. This is sort of an example of what we saw in numerous cores. And on the right was the hard work of identifying polymers. And what you can see here in this core, we see 4 types of polymers, polyethylene, polypropylene, and let's see, PVC and PCABS. So you can see that in the uppermost sample, we see 4 different polymer types. And as we go down, we see less polymer types and lower concentrations. And we collected numerous cores down the system and also analyzed a core out here, sort of off of Block Island. And shown on the right is a graph that's kind of plotting the different data from all the cores. And so just I'll walk you through this. Time is on the x-axis and microplastic accumulation rate. So this is the rate of accumulation of plastic with time. And you can see that, let's see, first of all, you'll probably notice this general trend. The graph sort of slants from high to low, right? And pretty much all the cores, we look at any one core, we see it's higher at the top and lower as we go back in time. And keep in mind that this is a log scale. So even just the slightest bit of slope is indicating a fairly significant exponential decrease with depth. We also will notice that if you look at the triangles, these are the marsh sites, and that these, with the exception of the one core with the orange dots, which I'll talk about in a second, these all sort of lie above the other data sets. And it's highlighting that the marshes, particularly adjacent, if we compare them to their adjacent subtidal sites, they're trapping 10 to 50 times more microplastics, which is concerning because, right, marshes are a really important habitat for juvenile fish. We've known for a long time that marshes trap pollutants, but this is another reality that they're also trapping microplastics, and that's probably not a great thing. And yeah, the one core that I'll draw your attention to, these orange dots, is Site 2, which is sort of in the central portion of the Providence River. This is sort of Site 1 and Site 2 are both cores where we have really high accumulation rates related to, or really in many cases, they're deposition rates, maybe accretion rates related to rapid sedimentation associated with dredging. if we look at sort of a combination of the data with time, what we'll notice is that as far as the type of polymer, that it's kind of variable. We do see quite a lot of fragments as well as fibers in, sort of those are the dominant types, as well as some films and foams. This is sort of a compilation of all the data. We also can see that the color distribution has really increased with time. When we go back in time, we only see a couple different colors of plastic. Of course, we also have a lot more particles to work with more recently, but we see a lot different types of colors. And then what we can also see in the polymer data going back in time, we see just a couple, a few different types. And as we increase with time, we're looking at over a dozen types in the more recent samples near the top of the core. And we do see some relationship to the creation and production of plastic. For example, I've noted that the first occurrence of PET, this sort of teal color, is in the 1970s. And I'm sharing this picture of Nathaniel Wyeth, who invented the PET bottle, which was patented by DuPont in 1973. And he's a good-looking guy. We have to thank him. We've all drank out of PET bottles, and they've done a lot of good around the world. But unfortunately, they are part of the bigger problem of microplastics in our marine environment. The top plastics that we see at all sites are polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene in the concentrations noted. And these are all sort of single-use plastics, which is one of the concerns that we've highlighted in the various things that we've participated in. So another, I think, important aspect of this that Victoria's done a great job of highlighting is how the concentration in the sediments is reaching a level that, based on lab studies, is of concern for organismal impact. So based on lab studies, they've identified a concentration of 540 microplastic particles per kilogram as being sort of a threshold of impact. And you'll notice here are the distribution of our samples. In the middle are yellow are samples that are just above that threshold. Orange and red far exceed that threshold. And I think that this is, a good innuendo to the reality of other impacts into our marine ecosystems that we really need to be thinking about. And keep in mind that at all sites, or pretty much all sites, we saw exponentially increasing plastics, and we're not really doing much to curb plastic inputs into our marine environment. Also, as part of Victoria's thesis, dissertation, she had a Fulbright in Vietnam, and there's a recent paper on that project. I highlighted, this was studying a much more impacted system. You can see the level of development in Nha Trang, Vietnam. She was looking at shoreline macro debris, not only plastics. And I'm not going to kind of go over the whole study, but in that paper, she highlighted this figure, which I think is an interesting one for us to be thinking about as those of us that are estuarine scientists, that of course, our estuaries are a range of morphologies and impacts. There are some estuaries that are very, still today, very natural. And then, of course, like Nha Trang, we have these highly urbanized estuarine systems. And what this figure sort of highlights is that what we can probably imagine is that the plastic sources are probably much higher in these highly urbanized systems, just because of the potential for, use and mismanagement of plastics and other debris. Additionally, because these systems in many cases have been hardened very substantially, if you look at Nha Trang or any other major urban system, we could probably imagine that there's going to be an enhancement of the flux out of these systems, so a more export. To contrast that with, where Narragansett Bay is, we're probably down in this partially developed, I'd like to think, not quite natural anymore. But again, we do have more sources of plastic in our upper estuary, and we also have more hardening and loss of wetlands that are probably allowing some enhanced flux out of the estuary. So something that we should be thinking about, not just here, but in other coastal systems around the world. And of course, a lot's heading out into the ocean, and there's still a lot to learn there. This is some work that, as part of her doctoral work, she did some work for the ocean race. This was collecting microplastic samples through our, remote parts of the ocean. Many of these places had never been sampled before. I'll also highlight that our ability to measure plastics has improved over time. Historically, we've measured microplastics in waters using sort of a net that has an opening, a mesh size of 300 microns. This study was pumping water and could measure sample concentrations down to 30 microns, which is obviously, as we look to smaller and smaller in size, we're finding a lot more and more plastics. The Coast Lab does have some ongoing efforts related to this topic. We are part of a team doing this first national assessment of marine debris in the United States. That's ongoing, and I have another slide on that in a second. And then also very happy, I'm sorry, I wrote his name wrong. Dan Roxbury, who's our lead PI for the NSF SimCoast, which is an EPSCoR eRISE project, which will be looking at various aspects of microplastics in the marine environment here in Rhode Island. Just quickly, the NOAA Marine Debris Mapping Program, we are in charge of the Regions 1 and Regions 2, which look at basically using NOAA's methodology of looking at macro debris on shorelines along transects at randomly determined sites through the US. Our sites extend from essentially Cape Lookout in North Carolina all the way up to the Canadian border. And every quarter, we have a team going out to map these sort of the plastic along shorelines. Actually, I'm headed to New York and New Jersey tomorrow to do a couple sites there. And every quarter, we have on the order of 50 sites to do across this region. And SimCoast is a broad project that we can try and talk a little bit more about if there's time, but assessing microplastic pollution through a variety of efforts. And I have a QR code that if you want to learn more about the project. Again, this is Dan Roxbury is the PI from engineering at URI, and we have a terrific team involving many universities in the state of Rhode Island. So people always want to ask, how can we help? I like to highlight rethinking our actions. Do we need everything that we buy? Of course, reuse when possible, refuse when able, and then reduce, repair, and yes, recycle. But as we all know, recycling is sort of a limited success when we're only talking about some less than 10% is probably actually being recycled out of the across the United States. Of course, the broader issue is that we really need to be thinking as a circular economy. What we produce, we need to be thinking about where it's going next and how it can be used. I do think we probably need to stop exploring creating new plastics and maybe try and create markets for the, maybe a more limited number that we have. And, as a scientist, I'll say support research. But anyway, I'll end there. Our coast has a history of pollution, and microplastics is sort of a new problem that's now widespread and not one that we're really doing a lot on right now as far as tackling the problem. Plastic pollution is increasing exponentially in our estuarine system. And while this has been a pretty depressing presentation, I continue to have hope with the great research and efforts going on here in Rhode Island and internationally, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll end with one of these depressing pictures. So,
Thanks,
thank
JP. So, we do have a question from Margarita, but you might have actually answered it. So it basically says, do the numbers you were showing reflect the microplastics fibers that shred from our clothing or materials washed in the laundry and then make their way through treatment plants without capture? And I'm assuming the answer to that is yes.
The answer is yes on that. One thing that it didn't really, we don't characterized in the method that we used is tire wear plastics, just because that, I mean, we may have counted them, but with the FTIR, we're not identifying them specifically. So, and I also want to highlight, which you may not have caught on the method slide, is that in part of what we were measuring were plastics 63 microns and larger. 63 microns is the cutoff for sand in geologically, and we thought that was a logical range to cut off. There's limitations to characterizing plastics that are smaller than that. The methods are getting better, and there may be people on this that are doing work in that realm. Certainly, the work in the upcoming Simcoast project will be striving to work down to the as small as we can. There's a battle there between efficiency of analyzing samples with producing measuring at really small levels without error. Okay.
Sabrina, if you want to come off mute and ask, you can.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Courtney, and thanks so much, JP, for the really great presentation. You highlighted how marshes are especially affected by, microplastic pollution and such. So I was wondering if in your research or Victoria's, if you had seen anything, any technologies or methods to help capture or prevent the microplastics from entering or staying in the marshes.
Great question. So there are different sort of tools being used in urbanized systems. There are actually like vessels that, sort of like, and I like the analogy of we do street cleaning in many systems. Why don't we think about doing, marine cleaning? And there actually are cities that do that where they have vessels that essentially drive around with collection systems. They're capturing larger debris. Obviously, they can trap other things too. New York City and others have several vessels that do that. There are also, you've probably seen booms. You've may have heard of other interceptor devices. I'm not going to go through all the technology, but yeah, there are different technology. Of course, their ability to capture the volume, particularly when we have big, just like part of the work that I did on sediments, I try and put that lens on it when I think about plastics. And most of the sediment flux that comes out to the ocean is in short-term events, really intense rain events when we have incredible volumes of water and therefore mass of sediment and likely mass of plastics coming out to these systems. And those are ones where our systems often get overwhelmed. Our interception systems, we do have combined sewage overflow systems in the Providence area that will capture some of it gets removed. Did recently do a tour of the system up in the Narragansett Bay system. But there's limits, right? And our systems get overwhelmed, and there's inevitably flushing across our coast into the sea.
It's really helpful. Thanks so much for the thoughtful response.
Oh, actually, I should add one other thing because I forgot to mention it. So there was a project this summer that Victoria did. I kind of just was a helping hand on this, where deploying these little marsh islands, which were marshes on essentially a mycelium, a mushroom float. And that's a sort of, she's studying what was captured. The data aren't in yet on that effort, but she deployed a few of these around the coast. You may have heard about floating
really
wetlands. I mean,
Yeah.
really
I
at the
mean,
scale
vaguely,
of
but
our
not in
problem.
practice up here. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's very cool.
yeah, and very cool. I mean, I think at the scale of the problem, another area that we've thought of is just we could do a little more beach cleanup. The coast is sort of our interception area where if we did cleanups not just on beaches, but maybe of marsh systems and along our shorelines in our urban systems, we could catch it. That's where probably our
Mhm.
best chance along rivers and the upper estuary to catch and remove this system, this material. And we kind of have to regularly
Prevent
do
it.
this because
Yep.
it's a regular flux. I think that's something that we need to be thinking about a little more.
That's
Margarita.
awesome.
Hi. Another quick question for you, which is two things actually. If I was also thinking about seeing the marshes as being sort of your capture mechanism there, do you have any studies about how long it takes for those materials that are captured in marshes to then degrade to the point where they become part of the sediment? They get washed in and become that kind of a problem. And then the other question was like, how do they get into us? Because that seems to be the big thing right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. On the breakdown, there's certainly an abundance of work on the breakdown of plastics that I can't immediately give you a specific number. I think what I can say as an oceanographer is that, of course, it's going to depend on the environmental system where it is and the conditions that it experiences. So, the classic answer of it depends, I think is reasonable. Um, you may have some plastics that are immediately fragmented because of interaction with other debris. On the other hand, you may have plastics that may get buried and recovered. I mean, you can find. I know I take occasional walks along the South Kingstown coast, and you can find buried plastic from historical storm overwash. From events that were probably Hurricane Carol in the 50s, and you can see them underlying sediments. They're not really broken down. And when we erode away, we'll re-release that material. So it's a range of environmental forcings that's going to determine the rate at which a specific plastic's going to break down. And wait, the other question was, what was it?
How does it get into
Oh,
humans?
yeah.
Humans. There's so many ways. A lot of people when I give this talk say, "Oh, you shouldn't eat seafood," and that's definitely not my message. Seafood is good for you, uh, and in most cases, we're catching seafood in systems that are, really clean, and I would advocate for eating seafood. What I do think we probably do need is some monitoring, not just of seafood, but all of our food for plastics. One of the things that research, because of this explosion of research in microplastics, we have measured plastic concentrations in everything. We have it in drinking water, we have it in beer, wine, all types of protein. You know, it's found everywhere. So obviously, there are things that we probably want to avoid doing, like heating up plastic or food with plastics in the microwave, thinking about maybe where your food's coming from, but definitely wouldn't say, please eat seafood. It's delicious and good for you. And but we do probably need to be thinking about our consumption of microplastics and nanoplastics and the ramifications of that. And there's been some valuable work here at URI, but we're learning more and more that plastics have been found in every organ of the body, in blood. It's certainly in our systems, and it's going to increasingly be so as we see the concentrations increasing in the environment.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah, thanks. Jenny put a comment in the chat, which is interesting, and it brought back some thoughts of our event that NBEP hosted a number of years ago on microplastics. But the idea of retailers reducing their use of plastic products and more of that, producer responsibility bit. Uh, so I know Rhode Island has had some interesting conversations of the State House and some of our rules about plastic and extended responsibility. But I don't know, JP, if you've got anything new on that or if Victoria's research has shown anything comparing areas that do a lot of this producer work versus cleanup.
I think that where I'll go with that is that, there's been a lot of effort, to try and develop policies to curb plastic production and use. Globally, we're learning a lot more from other places where they're being a little more assertive, like particularly Europe, but in Africa, they're removing, in certain countries, they're removing single-use plastics. I think we'll see more and more of that over time, of what the ramifications are for that in the environment. Here in Rhode Island, I did present on the bottle bill discussions. There was a committee to explore the bottle bill here in Rhode Island. I know as far as one of the issues in Rhode Island that we have is that we have this mixed use recycling, which after my presentation, there was a slew of recycling experts that presented, and it was really, these are actually retailer folks that are in the industry of recycling and selling the product, and they highlighted how this is a real problem with mixed use recycling here because we can't separate well enough, and then therefore we can't really sell it as effectively. Really, most of the products that are using recycled materials are coming from the states that do have separated recycling. Now, as far as using less plastic, that's yeah, the I think more companies are trying to do that in the sense of for marketing and other purposes. I think, demand is going to drive things. And that is, the unfortunate reality.
So I do, oh, mm, so yeah, Jenny was commenting more about source reductions at the local level. And um, I think if we had Jed Thorpe or someone from the advocacy at Save the Bay, they would have a lot more
Yeah,
information.
Jed would be great to
Yeah. And
speak
we
on
could
that.
definitely have that update for this group because I do think, at least in this urban space, that this is an important issue to think through. And because of that, and because this group tends to be really diverse, not just researchers, but we have a lot of folks who are living, who work on the ground and who are doing work in this area with Simcoast and with your work on this, how can this group support this? Like, are there more sites that need monitoring or sampling? Is there a way to get involved at the Simcoast level that would utilize this group of people to help answer some of these questions or develop materials to better advocate for policy?
I see we just so happen to have the PI for Simcoast on here. So maybe Dan wants to chime in. Not to put him on the spot, but yeah, I know that there are efforts. There will be a stack RFP. I don't know if has it been released already? There he is.
I am here. Thanks for calling me out, JP.
You bet.
Please introduce yourself, Dan, because I don't know if many folks on the call know you.
No, a lot of new names I see here. So, my name is Dan Roxbury. I'm a faculty here at the University of Rhode Island in chemical engineering, and yeah, we've been, you know, getting the Simcoast project off the ground. July we officially started, so we've been through the strategic planning process. We've assembled the teams. And we have a variety of different parts going on with this project. I encourage you to take a look at the websites. But in terms of the sampling efforts, so RT1, which is led by Andy Davies, he's leading in terms of where we are actually doing the sampling within Rhode Island. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to get involved. And I know we are reaching out to partners and we will be continuing to do that. So, with the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, the NBC as well, we have a lot of a lot of ideas for what we're trying to do here, and what we can possibly do as well. The other component that I will mention, so in terms of the characterization as well. So we have sampling, but then also characterization. So we are building a comprehensive characterization facility where we can analyze particles down to 1 micron. So that's what we're trying to achieve. That's going to be located at URI in the likely the engineering building at URI. So we do have an equipment budget. Going to be purchasing some pretty state-of-the-art equipment to go into the building there. So, yeah,
And
happy to take
the
any
stack,
questions about
Dan,
Simcoast, but
the stack RFP, do you know when that's out? Is that out?
yeah, that's actually out now. The LOI is due, I believe, the first week of January. So you have to create a letter of intent. It has to be a collaboration between at least two institutions within the state. And I believe it's up to 83K direct for 1 year of essentially seed type funding. So between academic institutions and non-academic institutions, there's a lot of opportunity there. The call is pretty specific in terms of what we're trying to be recruiting for, but if you read through the stack call, you'll see it's very much in tune with the Simcoast goals and what you'll find on our website. We actually had our hands in writing that RFP, so yeah, I encourage you to take a look at that. I could try to find the link if you want me to include that.
And for those who might get lost in the sea of acronyms, Rhode Island Commerce, so it's like
Here it is.
the state board of, this Commerce Department has the Science and Technical Advisory Council for it. And so a lot of this money goes to help. These are things that they focus on that could be economic benefit to the region and to the state.
And
So
I just put links in to stack and to the collaborative research
yeah,
grant guidelines for 2026 in the chat.
yeah.
I also want to make a point of highlighting that there's been other good work. I didn't quite highlight it in my presentation, so I apologize, but important work by Michaela Cashman, Sarah Davis, Colleen Suckling, Andy Davies, and other. I know Sarah just had a paper come out where they were using a computer model and observation data in Narragansett Bay. And so take a look for that study and more.
Yeah. Great. So any other questions for JP or Daniel or and Casey dropped a few legislative notes about things in Rhode Island. So if any other questions, um, ah, let's see. Marguerite dropped saying the Simcoast,
I think maybe I shared the wrong one.
well, the Simcoast one I put in was simcoastri.org. It opens for me, Margarita, but
Yeah, my QR code might have been wrong.
Okay, I did.
So I'll put that in the chat.
So we will make sure that we can get everyone who wants that access to it. We'll do our best.
Thank you. Thank
Internet
you.
is thwarting us, or the EPA and the internet, something.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, I'm gonna go back to sharing and kind of give a few updates on NBEP and some things that I think might be relevant to this crew. Let's see. Okay. So, woohoo. Many of you remember that back in May when we met, one of the things I said in terms of figuring out how to best organize and support this group and research in the Providence-Seekonk region, we said we would be putting a pot of money together for this. And so here it is, 75K. It will be coming hopefully January 5th. My goal is to finish it and send it out on that Monday. We all get back from the holidays. And this is a synthesis one. So we're going to ask you to synthesize data to describe social, economic, and or environmental conditions of this whole region on the screen here. So this is our HEC 12 watersheds, the communities here. We have tons of data in this area, and it hasn't always been organized and synthesized in a way to describe just this region. It's sometimes been put in context of the entire bay. And as you know, JP has shown, and a ton of research has shown, this area could be considered quite special in how things happen and what things mean for us in there. So we're going to do 1 to 2 projects. So figured we're offering 75K. So the max budget on each RFP will be 75K. So if you have something smaller than that, we'll also entertain it. What we're asking for is it's called like a 1.5 step. The 0.5 is that by February 9th, I would like you to schedule a phone call with me to talk through the project. This will be in the RFP. The idea here is that I can then assemble a really great grant review team who has the expert knowledge on the proposals that are coming our way February 16th. And so that's really for me to know what's coming, and also because I don't serve on that grant committee, I can help hone it and shape and answer questions and maybe even hunt down some data that we at the Estuary program may have or our partners may have, so we can jump on that. So that's the big thing, and this is really exciting because I wanted, when we talked about at the program doing these urban watershed collaboratives, the first thing I said is we have to put some money to this. So I'm super excited we could do this. And while we don't have a directive yet, we also have another RFP that's going to be more research focused that came in our work plan that started October 1st of this year. So we will definitely have chats with this group and others that kind of can talk about how we want to spend that money now too. And then we had a ton of ideas at our May meeting, and probably in the spring, we'll probably bring that back and see what else is coming up to the surface that we should be working at as a group. All right, so the next big thing that we've been talking about here at the Estuary program is what is termed our status and trends report. So this is like the state of, and many of you were around when we released ours in 2017. This one is not only going to be focusing on Narragansett Bay and its watershed, we're expanding to include Little Narragansett Bay and the coastal salt ponds. We're also looking to expand our indicators. We're describing trends. It's the whole idea is to describe the condition of the region, what that means currently and in context with the past. And because we're also releasing soon our comprehensive conservation and management plan, and many of you have been involved in that. That's like our big strategic plan for 10 years. This is kind of our baseline. So where are we starting from? And as the CCMP gets implemented, that strategic plan gets implemented, we can use the status and trends to say, how good are we doing against those goals? And then finally, and I'll show you how we're changing this report up a bit. And so we're actually going to focus on contextualizing a lot of the science with accessible stories that kind of knit all of this together. Because, you know, as JP showed, it's not just one thing. You know, he was talking about how stormwater is a big challenge for plastics. So while we could talk about plastics, we also should be talking about stormwater or the other things in the environment together. All right. So as you all remember, if you ever read, this book was a 500-page, 4-pound book focusing a lot on these topics. And it was written a lot like a bunch of scientific papers. Awesome foundation for the program, but it was not delivered in the way that our partnership likes information. Then they did. Now, 10 years later, we have a lot of better dynamic reporting, websites, story maps, whole nine. And so we're just said, let's start kind of over. And we're doing a new format. We're adding new topics. The format, what you see here is kind of what I'm showing to say what a web page could look like. This whole thing is going to be online. We will be able to print some, but the idea is that we can develop topics, each topic with a page. And because it's the internet, we can hyperlink other pages together. We can summarize these stories to kind of tell you what's going on the screen. But we're leading with these amazing figures. And so everyone who's working with us, and there's a lot, we're thinking about that compelling image. So we talk about this like metrics. That's like what you're measuring, something per mile, something per year. But we want to focus on how do we tell us visually. And then we'll leave lots of space for describing, for putting text onto this, for in-depth, and our background information. And the idea here is that the user can engage as deeply as they want. They just want the cool picture in front, they get it. If they want to keep going and going, great. And then the idea is because all of these things are interrelated, we can link to other stories, other indicators. We can say, because we know X, we are looking at Y in this way. And so that just to kind of give you an idea. And what's important is a lot of this stuff can address what we're talking about in our urban spaces. Timeline, we haven't really blown this one yet, which is good because, things take time. But right now, we're really in that space of developing what we're doing. We're going to tell everyone that when we're collecting data, the end of December of this month is pretty much the last date we'll look for data. This way, we don't have to keep hunting data next year. We can bring it all together. We can write. And that matches the timeline that we did on the 2017 report. We ended data collection at the end of 2015. So we have a full additional 10 years of data to go looking at. And the idea is pretty much in 2027 to have this all done. And so that gives us plenty of time, about a year and a half, to write this stuff, to hone in on what we want to say. So this is super exciting. The next few slides violate every PowerPoint rule known to man. My apologies, but this is completely just a download of the new topics we're looking at. And so everyone on this call, our team is putting stuff together. If something here interests you or something is missing entirely and you're like, I'm sorry, we need to talk about this, let me know, let our team know. The whole concept here is that we want the work we bring out to be responsive to everybody's needs. What are the stories we need to be telling? How do we want to present this information in a way that makes sense? So that way our partners can use it for their own work. And whether it's some of our partners who go advocate, take this information, package it up, and go to advocate. If they go to public, we can help get information that gets behind paywalls into a space that's easily and getting digestible for as many people as possible, and we can keep bringing that along. That's the idea behind this. It's open. It's to bring it all out and talk about it. So with that, many of you have also known that we're talking a lot about public access lately at the Estuary program, and we've been working on building out all the freshwater and saltwater access points throughout the region. And this is all 1,200 square miles or 2,000 square miles. Next up, we're also going to be looking at the park space. And so from here, we can talk about not only where the access is, but the features of that access. And then we can use that information to also talk about where people are going, how they're using these spaces. And we can consistently update this, particularly with the number of access points. Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council has been doing great in adding access. So we can completely keep going with this. And that's the idea. The idea was to build this database that we could work from. And when we talk about access, we could also talk about features, time to travel, all the things that we want to know about how people get where they go when they want to go visit nature. Another one that we're just developing, this is about resilience. It's development in the floodplain. And we talked about this with our steering committee last week, and it came to the point where we'd started discussing the idea of impervious cover in the floodplains. How much do we have, and can we track its removal? So as people are moving out, as we're reclaiming these spaces and allowing the flood nature to take them back, what does that look like? We can also talk about this in terms of population moving in and out of our floodplains. The next thing we want to do was update the hazardous sites. So Erin Berman, when she was with the EPA, did a look at marsh migration and the hazardous sites that could be underwater with marsh migration. We want to take that into the floodplain and kind of say, where are these hazardous sites? And this gives us a opportunity to discuss the challenges we have in addressing floodplain work. And we're going to talk with the folks who are doing storm tools and a lot of the inland work to link all of this together and make sure that it's usable. But the idea here is also to focus on those success stories that we are pulling people out of floodplains and buying out houses in East Providence, Johnston, Cranston. And so what does that look like? So this is kind of our way to say, how can we talk about how our communities are addressing resilience? And this was one way we thought of. The next thing, and JP brought this up, is the idea of sewer overflows. So this is like a stormwater, wastewater type of indicator. And we're going to look at CSO events. We're working with our partners to grab some data, either events or volume. We're going to do the same thing with sanitary sewer overflows, trying to focus on wet weather because there are SSOs that happen not in wet weather. We're going to look at precipitation. We've already done that with the previous work, but now we can bring it into context of this and what does that mean in terms of how our infrastructure is handling intense precipitation. And again, there's these success stories. We have CSO mitigation, the tunnels, we have abatement activities, and we can start linking this to a lot of the other work that we're doing. And so hopefully even more. So currently, right now, we are reviewing responses to an RFQ we sent out to look at the economic value of coastal and freshwater associated recreational opportunities. And so this is our really big first foray at doing an economic and indicator here for the estuary program. And we were really excited because again, we can use this to say, what are we looking at now? And then with all the improved water quality, how much money are we gaining from this? Rather than how much money do we lose with the beach closure, can we say, how much money are we gaining? And with East Providence opening the beach next year, hopefully, fingers crossed in 2026, we can have that as one of our public access sites. We can have that in this as a Sentinel site and say, can we say how much money we're gaining to this area because we're opening these beaches? So kind of a fun idea to look at. We also are doing our classic stuff. We're updating a lot of our water quality parameters using the buoy networks, and Brown University has a spatial survey, which is a more of a hypoxia extent. So it's instead of the buoys are in individual places, they have a boat and they kind of just drive around and see what dissolved oxygen profiles look like. And that actually focuses mostly in the Providence River. So we can use that as part of the description of the region of saying like, what are we doing when we're cleaning up our water quality? How is the actual water column looking? So you guys are sick of hearing me talk about all the fun things we're doing, but we have even more going on. And this is super cool that we now have a full complement of our staff here, that everyone's kind of picking off on stuff. So a lot of our stream focus work is because we hired a new ecologist and she is really knowledgeable and an expert in this area. So we're totally able to use that expertise and build out a lot of our freshwater indicators. We're looking at the fact that this region's doing a lot of really great work at taking water chestnut and hydrilla out. So how can we share those stories? And then just keep on the things we know that we need to talk about. So this is a really quick overview. Again, if anyone has questions or thoughts, can say them now or just come contact me. This is just this fun stuff. This is the stuff we're up to this year and next year. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are addressing the topics and challenges that make the most sense for everybody. Let's see. Yes, Eliza, thank you with the storm tool stuff. I was just on the thing yesterday and I have like 1,000 pages of notes.
Great.
Yeah, if you want to come off and talk a little bit about that, I think that would be perfect.
Sure. Yeah. So We've got a group of researchers at URI that have been modeling the major watersheds in this state to look at how increased precipitation events expected into the future are expected to affect the 100 and 500-year floodplains across the state. And so we've got some preliminary results of that work. And I'm happy to send, we just had a webinar yesterday about that. I'd be happy to send that around. And I'm also about to circulate a little survey, like asking folks for feedback on that work and our preliminary like online map viewers to see the initial results. So I can share all of that with this group and
Yeah.
be happy
I,
to discuss further with any of you.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And so, what's really cool about that inland work is that it is focusing on, they've done a lot of work in the Patuxent already, but they're adding the Blackstone, the 10 mile, all the way up and around down to the Kickamuit and whatnot. So, all of those really coastal inland river areas around the city of Providence. And they have some really great images up of the Woonasquatucket and Mashasek, which is, you know, I find super cool is saying, okay, here's my office. What do I see? Uh, and Casey has put in the My Coast. So if you want to talk a little bit about that My Coast effort.
Sure. So also at Rhode Island Sea Grant, we have the volunteer portion, volunteer monitoring portion, of the precipitation and flooding tools. It is called My Coast, and it has been mostly coastal so far, but over the last year-ish, I've been working to update it so that it has more abilities to look at like storm water flooding and road flooding. So that should be upcoming in the next 2-ish months. We're just working on a few more details and testing it a little bit further. And so happy to talk more about that. But basically, volunteer crowdsourcing photos of these events so that we can use it for a range of things, including working back at those models, having some data for those models that Eliza was just talking about, as well as just raising awareness about the issues.
Yeah.
Thanks, Courtney. This has been great.
Yeah, no, thank you all. And so that's what we're definitely trying to do with, and with our status and trends. And the beauty of this is that these efforts we can link onto that website, and that way if someone comes across our work of talking about it, we can link to others. So there is that. We still have about like 15 minutes. I didn't know if anybody on here had things going on in the area that they wanted to share, or if you need help of any sort. If there's a project you're working on and you need some ideas, part of this can be a crowdsource support, equipment share, site sharing, contacts, whole nine. So if anyone has anything, now's a great time. Just pop yourself off. And I can actually, what I will do is stop the recording. So this way we don't have, we can move on. So last, before we have a little chat, I just want to thank everybody for their time this afternoon, and JP for putting together a great talk. And I will get in touch with Michelle, and hopefully in the spring we'll have a few more people to do another lunch and learn like this. So if anything you all have and you want to share, we can continue to do this. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording now.